Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Institute for Personal Development, Kriya Yoga Ashram, where total consciousness is the new frontier.
Kriya Yoga is union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices to initiate this process.
Good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's talk consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of the Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty good today. How about you?
Well, I'm doing great today, too. Thanks for asking. And we'd like to thank you all for tuning in. Today on The Voice of Yoga, we will talk about the unreality of the mental material universe and why the Yoga Sutras suggest constant practice of detachment and continuous restraint of the thought variations. Listen as we explain the difference between rational thinking and the meditative state of divine knowing. In this show, we will discuss the practice of detachment from the corporeal sense impressions while abiding in the truth of being. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. We are talking consciousness. Join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and be a faithful witness of divine truth. Swami, I have questions about the title of the show, which is The Art of Watching Cosmic TV. What do we mean by that title?
Yeah, we're learning to perceive the testimony of the corporeal senses in a similar way we would look at a TV show or a movie with detachment by not fearing, loving, or hating anything appearing in this human mortal sense. I have something here from Herb Fitch, Revelation of St. John 22a, that I'll read. You cannot be both mammon and the spirit. You cannot be both mortal and immortal. You cannot be both matter and spirit. And so while we cling, we are disobedient. And while we are disobedient, we cannot hear the perfect will of the Father within us, leading us to a mansion beyond our present level of awareness. This rejection of the spirit leaves us in a state of frustration, wondering why, though we seem dedicated, though we earnestly seek, we still remain unable to break through those barriers which stand in the way of our illumination. Freedom comes when the Spirit of the Lord enters your consciousness, and it cannot enter the consciousness that is trying to bring the kingdom of God into this world. End of quote. And so in this show, what I really think we want to focus on is stop trying to figure out how the unreal became real and learning how to be a faithful witness to that which is real, the divine creation.
So I like what Herb is saying here. He has a lot of good gems in that paragraph that you were reciting. He's talking about while we cling, we are disobedient. And so now we're being disobedient. We cannot hear the perfect will of the Father within us. And then earlier in the summer, we were talking about this detachment. So we want to detach to not have this cling. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, that's what the Yoga Sutras recommends, constant practice of detachment and continuous restraint of the thought variations. Now, in order to do this with any kind of success, we can't just release and let go. It's not no self. It is oneself. And we have to attach to this divine creation, our divine self, the one perfect divine life. And we can't do that with the mind that is creating this sense of separation. So this is what we want to talk about. Part of learning the art of watching cosmic TV is recognizing that whatever is appearing in your material senses is not the divine creation.
I like he says about rejecting the spirit from us being disobedient. So we have to have this realization of what we're looking at. Is this real? Like, how did the unreal become real?
Right. And by us thinking that what is appearing in my material senses is real, that's being disobedient to the divine truth.
So by us being disobedient, that's what leaves us in a state of frustration. And I think that's why we have a lot of anxiety in our lives. We may be reading the Bible every day. We may be doing all these things that we think we're spiritual, think we're dedicated, but actually it's what he said. We're still rejecting the spirit.
Right, because we don't understand what Scripture is saying. We don't understand the first commandment. We don't understand the 9th commandment. And until we really get leadership where we're able to understand how this works, understand what it looks like when I stop thinking and I start knowing, when I'm now accepting myself to be the one perfect divine life, which is the only life there is.
So he says, in my last curiosity, he talks about our illumination and how we still remain unable to break through these barriers. So what would be your advice to somebody who wants to break these barriers?
Well, again, I like the Kriya Yoga. You need a path of action, you need a path of knowledge, and you need a path of devotion. It's always good to know how things are working, to know that what I'm looking at with my material senses is the error. It's not the truth. It's a false sense of existence. But then at the same time, you need a principle. You need the law. You need to know the divine truth, the divine idea. The divine creation is right here, it's right now, and it's functioning. And so once you have the foundation of what it is that needs to be done, and then you also understand that I can't do this with the mind that I'm using to get me through this lifetime, that I have to start to think differently. Kriya Yoga uses an 8-stage system, and we're working with a 3-body system. And we also understand there are levels of consciousness and degrees of awareness. Once you start to apply the strategies that are suggested, skillful use of thought, skillful use of breath, skillful use of water, skillful use of food, skillful use of exercise, once you understand to purify yourself physically and mentally, to create a hospitable environment to invite divine truth into your consciousness. See, truth in consciousness is what we are aspiring to do. But we also recognize that it is a state of being. You don't just academically declare that I'm spiritual. We must accept spirit as my identity. We must know ourselves in the way that we're known by the Creator, which is whole, complete, perfect.
Well, let's talk more about this life that you're talking about.
Yeah, because what we're calling life isn't life at all. So what is life? And as Mary Baker Eddy wrote, and I'll read it, become conscious for a single moment that life and intelligence are purely spiritual, neither in nor of matter, and the body will then utter no complaints. That's from Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, page 14, line 12. So we have the clue that life is spiritual. It's purely spiritual. And you start to get away from the belief in matter. And as we fill our thought with these divine ideas, then truth in consciousness will resolve things into thoughts and exchange the objects of sense for the divine idea, primarily because spirit is the only self-existent power in this universe. It's essential to begin to perceive the testimony of the material senses as unreal. And I have something here from Mary Baker Eddy, and I'll read this. Nothing we can say or believe regarding matter is immortal, for matter is temporal, and it is therefore a mortal phenomena, a human concept, sometimes beautiful, always erroneous. End of quote. That's from Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, page 277, line 29. And then we also have this soundbite here, which is a word of caution from Mary Baker Eddy on how we could possibly lose her discovery. And I'll play it.
Editorial. This was written by Mrs. Eddy in 1910. Its message is of vital importance to every Christian Scientist today. Principle and practice. The nature and position of mortal mind are the opposite of a mortal mind. The so-called mortal mind is belief and not understanding. Christian Science requires understanding instead of belief. It is based on a fixed eternal and divine principle, wholly apart from mortal conjecture, and it must be understood, otherwise it cannot be correctly accepted and demonstrated. The inclination of mortal mind is to receive Christian Science through a belief instead of the understanding, and this inclination prevails like an epidemic on the body. It inflames mortal mind and weakens the intellect, but this so-called mortal mind is wholly ignorant of this fact, and so cherishes its mere faith in Christian Science. The sick, like drowning men, catch at whatever drifts toward them. The sick are told by a faith scientist, "I can heal you, for God is all, and you are well, since God creates neither sin, sickness, nor death." Such statements result in the sick either being healed by their faith in what you tell them, which heals only as a drug would heal, through belief, or in no effect whatever. If the faith healer succeeds in securing, kindling, the belief of the patient in his own recovery, the practitioner will have performed a faith cure, which he mistakenly pronounces Christian Science. In this very manner some students of Christian Science have accepted, through faith, a divine principle, God, as their Savior. But they have not understood this principle sufficiently well to fulfill the scriptural command, "Go ye into all the world, and preach the gospel, heal the sick." It is the healer's understanding of the operation of the divine principle, and his application thereof, which heals the sick, just as it is one's understanding of the principle of mathematics which enables him to demonstrate its rules. Christian Science is not a faith cure, and unless human faith be distinguished from scientific healing, Christian Science will again be lost from the practice of religion as it was soon after the period of our great master's scientific teaching and practice. Preaching without practice of the divine principle of man's being has not, in 1900 years, resulted in demonstrating this principle. Preaching without the truthful and consistent practice of your statements will destroy the success of Christian Science. Printed in the Christian Science Sentinel on September 1, 1917, copyright 1917, by the Christian Science Publishing Society.
She gives us some great information here, and I really like the way she starts. The nature and position of mortal mind are the opposite of immortal mind. The so-called mortal mind is belief and not understanding. Christian Science requires understanding instead of belief. It is based on a fixed, eternal, and divine principle, wholly apart from mortal conjecture. And it must be understood, otherwise it can't be correctly accepted and demonstrated. And so this is what we're talking about here. Watching cosmic TV, what is reporting in our material senses is now the check engine light on the dashboard of consciousness. And we no longer react to the testimony of our senses. But she also said here, Christian Science is not a faith cure, and unless human faith be distinguished from scientific healing, Christian Science will again be lost from the practice of religion as it was soon after the period of our great master's scientific teaching and practice. One of the things you start to see is, why isn't this taking off like it was when she was on the planet? And this is probably the reason. We're trying to do this with the mind that can't bring forth the divine image. And there's a big difference between belief and understanding. And until we really get that and know what it means to have divine truth in consciousness, and that's where having leadership would be so beneficial. And then the other thing that she says, preaching without practice of the divine principle of man's being has not in 1900 years resulted in demonstrating this principle. Preaching without the truth and consistent practice of your statements will destroy the success of Christian Science. Spirit testifies with deeds, not words, and so this should become your litmus test. If you are still talking about it and you are not proving the presence of the divine creation, then you should troubleshoot what it is that you're doing.
Well, we're going to pause right here to hear a word from our sponsor. So listeners, we'll be back with you in just a few moments. Kriya Yoga Asana class is a module fitting into the master plan, leading the practitioner to the experience of total consciousness by attuning the mind-body complex to the divine idea. A system of exercises designed to use the physical appearance to determine individual level of consciousness and degree of awareness, starting with the process of lengthening and strengthening muscles to bring bones into the position of internal support. We educate thought up to spiritual apprehension, because when spirit is cause, it calls into expression the beauty of holiness, making creation perfect. Mountain pose may not bring you truth in consciousness, but truth in consciousness must bring mountain pose. Visit the website www.ipdtransform.com. Namaste. Welcome back. For those of you just joining us, you're listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. Swami, I have a curiosity about something that you had read, and you had said the so-called mortal mind is belief and not understanding. Christian Science requires understanding instead of belief. Let's talk more about this concept of belief. What can you tell us?
Yeah, the entire human experience is driven by belief, and it's driven by a belief in two powers. The only reality, the only truth in the universe is the power of spirit, and spirit is the power of one. Now, once there is division in this unified state of consciousness, that's when the whole thing starts to unravel. As long as we work with belief, we're not at the level of understanding. And that's a big distinction that you want to make, because that's the difference between thinking and knowing. That's the difference between working with the mind that can't bring forth the divine image and working with divine mind, which knows the truth.
So we're talking that belief is not understanding, but we have to have understanding before we can have this knowing.
Yeah, and to answer this question, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? I mean, we need what was called the Christ. We need the saving aspect of truth, which will make the divine creation comprehensive to us. Truth in consciousness will dissolve the false sense of self. And the way that we do this is by coming out of the belief we are a finite mortal being, by accepting spiritual identity and resting in the knowledge we are the reflection of this indestructible principle.
So is this what we mean by the difference between rational thinking and the meditative state of divine knowing?
Yeah, we think with our material senses, rational thinking. We're working with the information that's coming through the dualistic dimension of reality. Divine knowing we do in our soul, in our spiritual senses, which function in the absolute. They no longer work in duality. Rational thinking works on duality in that divided consciousness, and our spiritual senses work in the absolute. And it's one of the reasons why meditation is the 7th stage of yoga. And the 5th stage is pratyahara. We must rise above material sense, which then activates our spiritual senses, and that is how we begin to know this truth.
Well, Swami, what you're telling us, what does this have to do with this concept of cosmic TV, and why is it important to us?
Well, we have to be able to make this distinction between rational thinking or human faith and scientific healing or divine truth. And to help us with this, I have a soundbite from Herb Fitch, where we're asking the question, how can God be omnipotent if evil exists? This comes from mysticalprinciples.com, and if you want, you can get the entire audio file. It came from the Revelation of St. John, Class 22A, and I'll play the soundbite.
We're at a place now where God ceases to be a word that we use, or a belief that we have, or an abstract term that we hope someday to meet face to face. God becomes the experience of our soul. To us, God becomes a present living fact of life. But more than a present living God, we are now coming to that beautiful consciousness which says there is a total God, not a fragment, not a part-time God, not a God I turn to when I am sick, not a God I turn to when I'd like to know the truth, not a God I turn to when I want to change the evil to good. No, this is a God to whom I consecrate my life. This is a God in whom I abide, accepting His life and my life as the one. My will is gone. My personal sense of self is gone. My acceptance of God is total, complete. And at this level of your consciousness, you are not seeking earthly experiences. You are not seeking this world. You are not seeking effect. You are totally immersed in cause, in God. You are becoming self-conscious, and the shadow of duality is melting away. The voice of the personal self is dwindling, and the voice of the Spirit is becoming your daily companion. Now the love of the Father is burning in your heart, and you are prepared to walk in the Spirit, out of the belief in form, out of the belief in matter, out of the belief in mortality, resting completely in a total trust of God. Now that total trust is important, because having accepted yourself to be the child of God, the Spirit of God, you cannot distrust the Father's total presence. And so there is no bad that you want to change to good, because you have come above the belief in evil. To believe in evil would be a lack of total trust in God. The belief in evil would say there's God and evil. And that's a fractional trust in God. If there's God and evil, you do not have a total God. You still are in the God of this world, the mortal mind. The moment you know that God is total, the belief in evil disappears. All appearance of evil is nothing more than cosmic television to you. Mental images, projected through time, through space, to you they are meaningless. Why? Because you have accepted a total God, an omnipotent God. How can God be omnipotent if evil exists? In the acceptance of a total God, you have eliminated the belief in evil. Now we are among those who are now described. We come to the 19th chapter. After these things I heard a great voice of much people in heaven saying, Alleluia! Salvation and glory and honor and power unto the Lord our God. Now on earth there were many voices. In spiritual consciousness there is one voice. All is one. And so I heard a great voice as of much people in heaven, meaning the one, the union, into one voice of many. Alleluia. Now when they cry Alleluia, when this one voice says Alleluia, it's different than when the human voice says it. When you say, I'm going to the store, it then takes you 5 or 10 minutes to get there. When God says, let there be light, there is light. With God, the saying and the action are one. With man, the saying and the action can take centuries. In your new consciousness, when you're saying Alleluia, that means you are doing the works of God. Saying in spirit is doing. Saying in materiality is saying, and often nothing more. I say unto you. This is different than a man saying. When I say unto you, it is done. The power accompanies the voice of the Spirit.
Wow, that was a really great soundbite. And I like how he was letting us know that when God does something, it's right away. And I think we need to really learn from that.
Yeah, I really enjoy this Revelation of St. John, this work, and some of the notes that I have from this, where he says, God becomes a total living omnipresence when we accept spiritual identity out of the mental material image. Another thing that's really helpful is when he talks about total trust in divine omnipresence. Nothing to change or add or take away. I am a total God. And again, the only way that we can know this is when we are in divine mind, when we are out of rational thinking. And it really requires us to be out of that personal sense of self, out of time, out of space, out of concept, out of belief, out of thinking, out of personal human will and personal sense.
So, Swami, how do we answer that question? How can God be omnipotent if evil exists?
Yeah, well, see, this becomes your principle. If God is all, and all is absolute goodness, now what we have to do is question anything that does not have these divine qualities. And that's why it becomes cosmic television. Just like how you feel if you were watching a movie or where there was a situation where people were being harmed, or there were all of these troubled conditions in the movie. When you're sitting on your couch, you know that you really aren't in any danger, even though sometimes we do get so caught up in the film that we react as if we're in danger. And so we must be a faithful witness to divine truth and not mortal sense. Another thing is, this is from the 19th chapter of Revelations, where John is coming out of the old human consciousness and awakening in the divine truth, where on earth there were many voices, but in spiritual consciousness there's only one voice. And the hallelujah now means you have graduated from human to divine, from many to one, belief to understanding, from faith to divine science. We're now living out from divine mind, where saying is doing. Spirit testifies with deeds, not words. Principle and practice. Consciousness is experience. And it all comes down to, what am I conscious of?
Well, we're going to start breaking down our show for today. So listeners, be sure to visit the website www.ipdtransform.com. On the homepage, when you see the fading banner Blog Talk Radio, click it, directs you to its catalog page. Click on the Products tab, then Online Classes directs you to all the classes that Swami has available. Swami, any final thoughts about today's show?
Well, I would like to encourage people to join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance, get the light in your soul, and be a faithful witness of divine truth. Namaste.
Thank you for listening to our program, The Voice of Yoga. I'm Lisa Winton, with me, Kenny Toy. Signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga kind of day. Namaste.